So we are just waiting, I think, on my colleague Cathal, aviation management, to arrive. Here he is.
Yeah.
Hello, Cathal. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
We're ahead of schedule, like every good flight that you get on.
Okay.
It wouldn't be an open day if I didn't make a lame joke.
Yes, absolutely.
How are you?
I'm not too bad. Approximately how many people do we know are participating here now at the moment?
There are currently over 20 people on the line there.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. So you can actually get going if you want. I know we're a little early, but that'll leave us more time at the back end for questions and stuff like that. So if you want to get going, you're more than welcome to take over the floor, Cathal.
Okay, let me find my slide. Okay, so my name is Cathal. I'm the program chair for the DCU Business School degree, undergraduate degree, let's say, in aviation management. So I'm going to talk to you for about 15 minutes approximately about what you can expect if you apply for that course and if you come and study with us on that course. I'll say a little bit about the content of the course. I'll say a little bit about the options you have, because there's a number of versions of the degree that you can do, depending on what your interests are. And then I will say just a little bit about the state of the industry, because obviously that's quite special at the present moment. Okay, so the course is, the CAO code is DC117, the points last year 475. So it's similar, in fact, to quite a few other courses or business school courses that are available to you if you're choosing one of those. I would describe the course in a very general way as it's a mixture of a business degree, which Rob has just been speaking about in the last half hour, for students who want to take a pure business degree. So 2/3 of the courses you study or the modules you study are business courses like economics and accountancy and HR and management and so law. And then 1/3 are aviation modules, so that you are equipped to work in the aviation industry specifically, as well as having the other information and knowledge as well. So you have the option of studying fleet planning or airport operations or aviation law or safety, and altogether about 15 different modules that would add to your knowledge across a whole range of areas in aviation. So it's 2/3 business, 1/3 aviation, and employers say to us that that mixture is what they want. They don't want people, I mean, they can always employ a business studies student directly if they wanted to do that. They don't want people who are exclusively aviation. They want someone who can perform as a manager in a general way, but also knows some of the specific points that are special to aviation. Okay, so it is, why this particular degree? So we call it AMPS, Aviation Management with Pilot Studies, which is one of the options. It's the only degree of its kind in the country. We are the place to come if you want to aim to be a manager in the aviation sector. Now, the aviation sector is a lot bigger than it looks, and it's a lot more specialized than it looks, because there aren't simply the airports and the airlines and the air traffic control. I mean, obviously there are the manufacturing firms that build the aircraft. There are specialist safety people. There are the financial and leasing side of things. There are firms that provide a lot of services within the airport that might be to do with ground handling or fuel or all kinds of other areas. And so there's a very large number of possible companies in which to find employment if you are qualified on the business side and on the aviation management side as well. There are, if you look at the bottom bullet on the slide I have before you now, there are 3 possible ways in which you can qualify as an AMPS graduate. Most students who aim to be managers spend 4 years as a student in Dublin City University, and they study in the university. It is also possible, however, to do 3 years with us and then to leave DCU and go to a licensed pilot school, a recognized pilot school, where you will be trained to be a pilot. So at the end of 4 years, or a little more than 4 years, you have your 3 years at DCU, you have your pilot's license, the two are added together, and you end up leaving DCU as a pilot graduate. And then the final option, which is quite new, is similar, where again you do 3 years in DCU, but you can train to be an air traffic controller. If anything, that might be an even more specialized job than the pilot. And if you are trained to be an air traffic controller, I'll come back to how you do that in a second, and you have your 3 years in DCU, you graduate from us with your, as an ATCO, as it's called, air traffic controller graduate. Now, how do you become an air traffic controller? So it's not quite as straightforward as piloting, because there are a good few pilot schools in a lot of different places. In Ireland, there's one air traffic control company, the Irish Aviation Authority, and from time to time, they run a competition, and they select a pool of students who they take and train to be air traffic controllers, and that takes a bit over a year. A lot of it is done in Shannon, it's done in other places. So when you're in your second or maybe your third year in DCU, if an ATCO is the career path you have in mind as one possibility, then you will need to be finding out from the IAA, are they going to be running a competition while you're still in DCU? And if you were selected, you would then stop studying with us after 3 years, do your final year as an ATCO trainee, and then with that license plus the 3 years of exam results here, you qualify and you leave. Now, as well as that, one other element is the second last bullet there, what we call intra, which is an internship, work experience internship, which you do in the first half of your third year. So this year, students who are finished second year, who do their exams any day now, between that point and next Christmas, there is that interval of about 6 months, sometimes a bit more, where you go and you work in the industry. So you might, I mean, that could be any of the companies in the industry, airport, airline, all the various other ones. Obviously, most of those firms are not functioning right now, not this year. But I'm certainly assuming that by next year, things will be back to the way they were. And of course, you yourselves won't be at the point where you would be looking for an internship for a year more again. So it's even further into the future for yourselves. Now, our experience is that very, very many students get a job offer when they finish in DCU in the company where they did their 6-month placement, because a 6-month internship is a little bit like a 6-month job interview. Job interview is just a couple of hours, not a lot to go on when you're trying to decide do you want to recruit someone or not. But if someone has worked in your company for 4 or 8 months, you certainly know long before that time has elapsed whether this is someone you want to see again or not. And a lot of students are told when they finish their internships, look, we want to stay in touch with you. Maybe you could even work with us part-time for the balance of your time in DCU. And then we want to talk to you when you do graduate, because we'd like you to come and work for us. So the intra is very worthwhile for its own sake. I think very important, even just in educational terms, to combine work experience with book study. But it has a very, very good track record of giving you a job offer, as long as the place you went to work turns out to be a place that you decide you'd be happy to be with for a longer time. Okay, so various possibilities within AMSTEL, three strands, if you like. What will you actually study? Well, I've mentioned a little bit about that. The courses, the program, the curriculum is being updated in recent years and will continue to be for a few years more. So there are some new courses or new modules being brought into the program, and then other ones are being taken out to make room for that. So there's a general introduction to business, Business 101, that you study in first year. There's a very important module in critical thinking that you will also be studying in first and indeed in second year now. And then there's a an innovation module, Life, to introduce you to the many, many different kinds of firms that you might find yourself working for or might want to establish yourself. And come back to critical thinking because we're flooded, maybe very especially on social media, but just flooded with a lot of information at the present time. And it's just not always clear how much of it is reliable and how much of it is not. So the critical thinking modules that you'll do in both of your first 2 years are designed to equip you to weed out the information you can trust from the information you can't trust. However, there are more modules than just simply those to be done. So you can see in the left-hand column there, in addition to what I've mentioned, there's the accounting, there's flying theory, because it seems to us a good idea that even if you spend your career sitting at a desk somewhere, that if you're in aviation, it would be relevant for you to know why planes stay up in the sky. So there's there are two flying theory modules, in fact, and then you'll be doing economics and maths and IT and so on. And a further set of modules then in year 2, covering new aviation modules and new business modules. You'll do a half year of modules in year 3 because the other half is spent in the internship. And then at the end of year 3, that's when you'll be deciding which of the 3 forms of the final year you want to take. Is it to become a pilot? Is it to become an air traffic controller? Or is it to remain in DCU and do some further studies to graduate as a university graduate? Obviously, the pilot studies possibility is not there for everybody, because even though there are some cadetships which will subsidize the cost for you, for the most part, the student or their family has to finance the cost of pilot training, and that is very expensive. That is of the order of 70 to 80,000 euros to be trained as a pilot, and not everybody, of course, is able to pursue that. In fact, if we have a first year class of, let's say, 60 students, which would be the case in the last year or 2, at the beginning of the 4 years in DCU, there's a pretty high level of interest in piloting amongst many of the students. But by the time we get to 4th year, only a small proportion of those are able to actually continue. So in many years, we might have maybe 5 students would go on to pursue piloting, and then the balance would remain in DCU. And so far, just 1 or 2 have gone in the direction of air traffic control training, but that's very new. So that's part of the reason why that's on a small scale yet. The internships, all of the companies in the industry, including all of the ones shown in front of you there, in normal times, in 2019, and I hope again in 2022, recruit students, work them for 4 to 8 months, and then see how they assess them after that. Now, partly because of the flying theory module, there is a maths requirement, as well as the overall points that a person has to attract. There's a maths requirement as well in order to come to DCU as an aviation management student, and that is ordinary level 4 or honours level 6. So you will need to satisfy both of those requirements if you want to be admitted to DCU. Where do the graduates work? There are the sort of obvious places, airlines and airports and so forth. There are some of the less obvious places, including sort of government and policy bodies, and the banking side of aircraft finance and so on. It is also true now that many of the employers, all the main employers of aviation management students, run graduate recruitment programs. In other words, they specifically want to recruit university graduates to be trained in as managers in their organization. So that's true of Ryanair and Aer Lingus, it's true of Dublin Airport, it's true of other bodies. They they do recruit school leavers for certain roles, but they have a strong requirement to recruit a certain proportion of university graduates as well. It is also the case, as is true in many industries, but it's certainly the case in aviation, that airlines maybe in particular, but some of the other companies also, want to achieve a better balance in gender and in cultural terms than they have traditionally managed. So if you want to have a slight caricature of an airline, you would say, well, all the pilots are men, all the cabin crew are women. And that is in fact, typically the case. However, the airlines themselves don't want to stay like that now anymore. They want women pilots for sure. They're certainly open to having male cabin crew. We can see that in aircraft anyway now. And they are also, as airlines fly to more places and further away places and places that are not so familiar to people born in Ireland, they're keen to have students and graduates who have different cultural backgrounds and who understand, maybe the Middle East, or they understand North Africa, or they understand Africa generally, or they understand other parts of the world. And having students of that kind, graduates of that kind on their staff, just helps the companies interpret the world for parts of the world that they didn't previously have much to do with. So the net is thrown very wide in terms of who the companies want to recruit now. There aren't too many restrictions at all. What about the state of the industry? Well, not only now, but in the past also, the industry has gone through periods of contraction, shrinkage. So looking at the table in front of us there, which is Dublin Airport passenger numbers, you can see that after 2008, when there was the banking crisis, traffic numbers at Dublin Airport fell substantially. They fell from about 24 million to about 18 million, which was a big drop. But they did recover. And in fact, if I had the full number of years there, traffic went right up to 34 million in 2019. And of course, it's fallen a rather shocking way since. But the periods of shrinkage have been followed by periods of growth. And it is a reasonable thing for us to suppose that that will be true this time around as well. We actually have the largest, this year, our first year class at about 65 students is the largest it's ever been. So even though the industry is absolutely struggling, the number of students interested to work in the industry is bigger than it's ever been, certainly from our experience. And I would also say that, and this is said completely sincerely, the industry has never needed more than it does today smart, well-qualified, bright university students and university graduates to come and work for it. Because even when the virus blows over, if we assume it does, there are a lot of other challenges that the industry will have to work its way around in the coming years. And the climate and carbon and all of that is a very, very big question, which the industry will have to have a more satisfactory answer to than I think it does today. And DCU graduates would be equipped to help the companies figure out what exactly they're going to do in that respect. So the demand for students, as well as the numbers of students interested to study the degree, is going to be high, I think. It's not only passenger traffic, of course, this is actually runway movements, aircraft movements, also for Dublin. And you can see the aircraft movements fell an awful lot more than passenger numbers fell. But, although I can't see it myself now because my own face is blocking it out, also there was a recovery, in both the passenger numbers and the movements, naturally, because they're kind of connected. And we have no reason not to assume that at whatever rate it happens, we have to wait and see that there will be a recovery again. I mean, what it all boils down to, I think, on one level is just simply this. If I give a personal example, I have a brother in Dallas. Now, I will not be sailing over there to see him. I will certainly not be walking over there to see him or driving over there to see him. So there are certain, long distance transport services that only aviation can provide. At the present time, only aviation can provide. And that is the reason to suppose that aviation will recover while maybe research continues on other means of transport in the future. So the strengths of AMPS, the connection, if I look at the bottom box there, the connection between DCU and the industry is very strong. Students will have had work placements, certainly your cohort will have work placements in a couple of years' time. We have had a lot of senior managers from the airport, from the airlines, Willie Walsh, Michael O'Leary, other people who have come and spoken to the class and will be back again to speak to the class when we're in a physical classroom, and who will give you their opinion on where things stand and what's needed and what the contribution of DCU graduates might be in the industry and for their companies. And then a lot of our aviation modules are not taught by, let's say, professors in the university. They're taught by people who work as managers in the business. So we have a lot of people who are teaching modules, maybe on safety, on air traffic control and other things like that, whose day job is also to work in those areas and who are completely up to date in regard to what the actual position in the industry, if you were working there, is in their particular field. And I think a bit longer than I planned, but I think that's what I have to say for the moment, and we'll see what questions there might be.
Well, you're absolutely on time. We're doing great for time, Cathal. So so no worries there at all, and thanks a million for your talk.
Okay.
Sorry, we had a question there a sec about aviation. It's gone now. Sorry, it's gone. I just can't find that one. So I think while we're waiting for a few more questions to come in, I might just ask a couple that I know frequently come up about the course. Can you give examples of the places that people do intra?
Okay. The bigger companies use a lot of intra students. So if we go back to 2019, so Ryanair, for example, would typically have had 10 positions for intra students. Smaller companies would take maybe 2 or 3. Some very small companies might take 1 or 2. So we've had intra students working in the Department of Transport, working for the regulator's office, working for the IAA, working in Dublin Airport and some other airports, and especially working in the airlines.
Okay, somebody here, very straightforward question, would like to know how many places there are in the program.
Okay, so there are, last year we took in 65. I would expect that if that number of students is interested in and reaches the points, we will be doing about the same again. Now, a couple of years ago, we only had 40 students, so we have a lot more places than we used to. And then that's supplemented because we get some mature students and some other people over and above that. So it's not by any means now the smallest discipline in the business school as it was once in the beginning.
Yeah, and kind of a correlation there. Will there be more places available on the course this year?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Well, no. I'm assuming that we will be that the dean, whose decision it will be taking the same approach as she took last year.
Okay. There's a question here just about pilot training. So we've got plenty of time on our hands, Cathal. So it might be no harm to talk a little about pilot training, if that's okay with you. So somebody here is talking about specifically if you train with Aer Lingus, how that works and whether or not they pay for your training and take it out of wage after. So you might just kind of generally talk around whether you do it privately or whether you do it through like an Aer Lingus scheme or whatever.
Okay, so Aer Lingus certainly, but also the Air Corps, the military guys, have cadetships. They have a certain number of cadetships each year where they open the competition. People who want to become pilots apply. They make their selection, and those people do not have to pay the training costs then. However, they do have to sign a contract to say that they will continue to work for the airline for a certain number of years afterwards. Now, I think that might be 5 or 7. I'm not exactly sure, but the training is not charged for, except that you must work as a pilot for the company for some years after. However, there is really only a handful of cadetships of that kind. And most people who become pilots either go to a flying school in Ireland, and there are certainly two. There's Atlantic in Cork, there's Western out on the west side of Dublin, or they go to a flying school in Britain or Spain. Sunnier countries can fly planes on more days than wet countries. So quite a few students have gone over the years down to Jerez and so on in Spain, where they do their training faster because the school is open more days.
Is it? I didn't realize that that was a factor. That I mean, it stands to reason. You know, if you've got visibility, it's harder to get out when you still got your training things on, I guess.
Well, Spain and Florida are two big air pilot training countries for reasons of sunshine. I would point out though that for whatever reason, probably bad rather than good, you either have a pilot's license for the US or you have a pilot's license for the EU. They're not transferable over and back. So an Irish student who wants to have a career in European aviation, Florida is no good to them.
Okay, and of those, sorry, I'm putting myself on mute because there's some drilling behind me here in DCU, so I'm trying to avoid that coming through. In terms of the students then that don't do piloting, for example, typically what do they do? Like, let's say they go work in DAA or they work in an airline. What type of work are they involved in?
Oh, so basically the work is trainee managers. So a lot of companies now would have, you know, in aviation, outside aviation, would have a 24-month kind of graduate training program. And they would propose to recruit somebody and to have them do 6 months work in 4 different parts of the organization and give them a very rounded sort of picture. So, you know, in Ryanair, for example, there's scheduling, there's just scheduling of flights, making sure that the services the company wants to offer are in fact offered, and that the planes are in the right place in the mornings, and the crews are there, the fuel is there, and there's a lot of scheduling work, there's a lot of planning work, and then there's plenty of work sort of on the marketing side and lots of other areas.
And then typically a student will remain in that company afterwards if all goes to plan, right, and will sort of self-select into an area that they were interested in as part of their rotation.
Yeah, exactly. They have done this rotation, and then I think the company will likely assign them to some part of the organization to work in. And then, of course, like anyone, for as long as you're happy to continue to work there, you can continue to do that. Okay,
sounds great. I mean, I think that that's an important point, because I'm sure there are a lot of students that are considering doing the degree that maybe are aware vaguely of what piloting looks like and the training route and all of that, but they're maybe not quite as aware of, what the industry overall looks like and the variety of things that you can do if you're an aviation enthusiast. And on the alumni side, we see our students developing really good careers in aviation and doing really diverse things within the industry, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there are far more companies and far more sort of specialized services across, even just in Dublin Airport.
Yeah.
A lot of specialized firms based in the airport, but they're not the DAA itself.
Yeah.
Bring, even something as mundane as wrapping suitcases in plastic so the suitcase doesn't get damaged. There's kind of micro firms doing now. I don't think they would be recruiting DCU graduates, but there's a lot of firms. There's a lot of fuel work and so on, and there's a lot of airport itself will be doing a lot of investment, so it will have a lot of projects of that kind where it'll need managers to make sure they reach their goals there.
Okay, our next question is, the pilot stream, is an aptitude test required, and does that take place in DCU or in the flight school?
Okay. All the pilot training happens outside DCU. We don't do any of that. And there's certainly aptitude, both medical and I would say kind of psychological. There are medical standards to do with eyesight and health in general, as you'd sort of expect. And then, if I can just put it in the simplest terms, which is how I understand it myself, it's a good idea to be a calm person if you're going to be a pilot, so that if something surprising happens to you one day, you cope. So there will be that kind of aptitude test conducted as well, because a pilot school doesn't want to go through all the effort of training you only to find 15 months later that you're not well placed to pass the exams.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Could you also talk a little about air traffic controller training, which I know a calm mindset is important in that field too.
Well, I have a couple of times been in the control tower in Dublin Airport, and there are these little dots crossing the screen, and they move very fast. So the planes can be in a completely different place in 3 minutes to where they were 3 minutes ago. So again, there'll certainly be an aptitude requirement there, and that is obviously a highly responsible job. So if a controller is looking after a block of airspace with a number of aircraft, then clearly they're responsible for more lives than the pilots in any one of the planes are. So again, there's a strong aptitude requirement there, and the career chances in air traffic control kind of work in cycles. And sometimes that's true in piloting too, where if the airlines recruit a lot of people, or the air traffic control company recruits a lot of people, then those people will often stay kind of for a lengthy career. But as they come to the end of their career, then the companies will need to replace them, and they'll be doing quite a lot of recruitment. So I think it is true to say that in air traffic control, if we put the virus to one side for a moment, there are many people, in the middle and later of their air traffic control careers at the moment, and therefore I would expect the IAA will be recruiting waves of air traffic controllers in the years ahead. Some of those might be DCU students, many of them won't, of course.
You mentioned gender balance. I mean, that's another interesting point, and I think that's important as young women that are on the line today and interested in AMPS are aware of that, about that need to diversify, that airlines have that awareness of diversification within roles across their organization. That stark difference that you talked about earlier on of the difference between the cabin crew and the pilot.
Yeah.
And how airlines are starting to head that off. I think that's really important for women that are on the line.
Yeah, airlines care about that a lot now. And one of the encouraging things, when open days used to be face-to-face, one of the really encouraging things in that kind of meeting now is there's so many inquiries from young women.
Yeah.
Both about piloting, about aviation in general. I get no sense that school leavers and so on at the school leaving age who are female feel any restriction now on aviation as a career they could get into, and nor should they, because far from being restricted, they're actively being looked for.
Yeah, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I think we might leave it there, Cathal, because we don't have any more questions. We've got one more here, but I can take that myself. It's about entry requirements, so I can sort that one out.
Okay.
So, Cathal, I think that might be it. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and all of that great information on aviation and your degree program. That's brilliant. So thanks so much.